Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're here today to talk about hip hop and the globalization of Black culture. This is a two-part lecture. We're going to start part one in New York City, talk about the origins of hip hop and rap, and talk about the old school style and the East Coast style. In part two of lecture, we'll talk more about where hip hop and rap have gone outside of the East Coast and talk about the rivaling West Coast styles. So very excited about today's lecture. I'd love to pull up my lecture notes for us to look at so we have an idea of where we're going for today. Sorry, one sec. Let's try that again. Here we are. So, like I said, we're going to talk about hip hop and globalization first. So, upper left-hand side. Hip hop is by far the most globalized popular music today. And there's a number of reasons as to why this has occurred. So first off, hip hop is really not just a musical genre, but a culture that encompasses music most certainly, but also poetry, dance, performance art, visual art, and fashion. So hip hop is a large label that we'll be using in a variety of different contexts for today's lecture. So hip hop culture, including rap, so rap is a part of hip hop culture, really did explode during the era of the internet. And technology, we've seen as a theme, has had a number of revolutionary impacts to the musical community, specifically in regard to hip hop, but also other musical genres. Music software, which has really become quite sophisticated at this point, has been also made widely available. If you have a smartphone, you have the ability to actually create music yourself in a fairly sophisticated fashion. And that's something that just belongs in your pocket. And the same could not necessarily be said, of course, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So we've had quite a leap in the genre because of technology alone. Not only has it made the creation of music significantly easier, and of course then more widely available, it also has made the dissemination of music productions, whatever you create, also incredibly easy. Almost anyone is capable of doing it. Consider the fact that in something as simple as what comes with my iPhone, GarageBand, I can record a number of samples, remix them, add a pre-recorded drum track, sing on top of it if I was confident enough, and then release that on a free platform that reaches an international audience, such as SoundCloud, for example. It's all within your feasible fingertips. And that's a big change that has certainly had a number of impacts as to this specific genre. Coming back to sort of some other core ideas, free trade agreements increased the worldwide distribution of music products. Again, we're not just relying on the digital medium. There's been a good release in physical format as well. Additionally, the rhythm and tempo of hip hop is also incredibly danceable. And we've seen and heard a number of music traditions that closely tie music and dance together. And certainly with the sort of older musics that we've studied, thinking specifically perhaps Irish folk music or klezmer music, we've seen those traditions adhered to other artistic formats, and hip hop as a musical label alone is inviting to dance. We have a beat structure that is repetitive, predictable, and it also moves at a rate in which is not too fast and not too slow. So again, a very danceable, what we call tempo or BPM, beats per minute. Interestingly enough, we've also showcased a variety of different narrative languages and viewpoints in the context and genre of hip hop. Many languages specifically at this point, and we'll cover this in part 2 of our lecture, so not today. We're not a part of this series. We're going to see that this style of more or less Sprechstimme, this like half sung, half spoken delivery of text over music is an interesting format for other languages as well. So hip hop has indeed become popular because also of its interest in other languages. So we're not just seeing it in the East Coast, but also in the West Coast. We're also seeing it internationally. So very, very interesting point regarding that the format and it being applicable to many different cultures and people. Speaking about that technique specifically, rap really doesn't also require specific formal training or formal musical knowledge. And I'm talking about the practice of textual delivery over a musical accompaniment. It being a kind of sung spoken technique invites people who are not necessarily trained musicians, trained singers, to engage with the medium as well, even if they might be novice musicians or label themselves as non-musicians. So just some of the reasons why hip hop has maintained its popularity, most certainly in the context of popular culture, and it has maintained its stronghold since its emergence in the mid 1970s. So speaking of, that's a great place for us to start, the 1970s. And when I talk about rap and hip hop and the origins, generally it's agreed upon that the first style that emerged within this larger umbrella was the old school style. And the old school style was really founded among the young Blacks and Latinos in the South Bronx. And the period of the old school style being quite popular, it emerged in 1974 and was a really notable and popular style until 86. So before speaking too much about what old school style is, I want to give us a little bit of context as to what was happening in New York in 1974. Much different environment than current New York City. I'm going to pull up some footage without any sort of musical commentary or anything of New York City, specifically the Bronx, which is going to be the birthplace of this genre that we're talking about. So let me pull up some film footage. So this is footage of the South Bronx in the 1970s, shot on 16mm film. As you can see, the subway cars are well graffitied. Whole swaths of the city look like this, but particularly the surrounding boroughs to Manhattan. Very good. So again, a very different looking New York from current day New York. And just wanted to give you an idea of what the area looks like that is going to end up supporting the beginnings of this very international style. I'm going to pull my lecture notes back up. As I was saying, we're really talking about, 1974 to 1986 first. I want to kind of wrap back around to talk about technology first, because that's going to have a major impact on this new and emerging genre and culture. So in the 1980s, samplers became commercially available. And for those of you who don't know what a sampler is a device that really just allows you to digitally store, manipulate, and play back sections of, either commercial recordings or sound samples that you captured yourself. Sampling ended up replacing turntablism, and producers ended up replacing DJs. So this is the next in a lineage. And in the 1980s, sampling really allowed the sounds and styles of hip hop to enter the mainstream and become a very dominant cultural and economic force nationwide. Interestingly enough, by the 90s, rap was the largest selling popular music genre in the United States. But again, we're gonna start back in the 1970s and the 1980s. So in order to give us some context about, what it is that makes up old school rap in particular, we should kind of talk about the main four components, or what we call pillars, of the old school hip hop culture. And they're listed right over here. So first off, we have the DJ or the disc jockey. Next, we have the MC, or otherwise known as the master of ceremonies. We also have a writer who is often a graffiti artist, and someone who is in charge of choreography, at that point known as b-boying or breakdancing. The two people of most musical concern are the first that I mentioned, the DJ and the MC. And that's where we're going to begin our discussion of, what a break is, and how that interfaces with the old school style. So let's start off with the DJ first. In the mid-1970s, it was the role of the DJ, otherwise known as the disc jockey, to provide a sound system and to play vinyl recordings in a informal sort of setting. Could have been an outdoor dance party. It could have been a rec room event, or even an underground club. But those were the sort of first initial venues. As the genre became much more popular, we have the emergence of this genre in more established venues, like the Diplomat Hotel, which is near Times Square, for example. So in a short amount of time, we have a huge movement of where this music is being performed. Before I talk about the artists that were particularly important in promoting this new genre, I want to talk about the idea of, looping, sampling, and what a break is. So the DJ is the person whose main role, in addition to providing the sound equipment, is to actually create the musical accompaniment for the MC. The MC at that point was slightly different, but today is analogous to the rapper. What happened is that we have a structure that emerges that it ends up being a tried and true staple of the genre. And this is where sampling comes in. So the principal structure is to sample an 8-beat cycle that is from the break of a funk or disco tune. So what is a break? A break is a short passage of music where the band drops out and we just have the drummer who's playing a solo. As a result, we have something that's really rhythmically forward and not so much about melody. It means also that the sampling can be added in a number of different kind of melodic contexts if we wish. So it's this breakbeat style is really one of the defining principles of old school turntablism and is a huge influence on, rap and hip hop productions to date. It's so important that it is worth discussing how that's actually done. So I'm going to play us a little video that discusses more about the peculiars of this technique and actually has us watch how it is done.
Farts, burps. Beat juggling is the live manipulation and remix of music right before your eyes. Usually what you do is you kind of use the same two records. So this is like, I'm just using a piece of the record. It's called the break. It's like, and then this is the same record as well. Like that, right? The fader is like for that turntable and that turntable, right? And in the middle is both. So if you mess with both of those beats, you can go. I've always been into music ever since I was a...
Cool. So that's one way, and that's obviously, hopefully, obviously a modern video where we're using analog technology to recreate what was done in a slightly different style back then. But that's basically what we're talking about, taking a small section of a song that's rhythmically inclined and pushing back and forth between two samples to create additional rhythmic complexity. So there's a lot of things that an artist can do that sort of sculpts their voice within this genre that is essentially repurposing old things or things that are of the current day, but it's part of the genre is making reference to things that already exist, which is interesting. We haven't seen that, and that's one of the major impacts of technology that we can see and hear on this particular genre. So before I close out this this section of our discussion, I want to talk a little bit about the MC, the Master of Ceremonies, because the Master of Ceremonies is going to become a an important figure, otherwise known as the rapper. But what that person did in the context of old school hip hop and rap is certainly a little different. Let me go ahead and pull up my lecture notes. Okay, so like I said, I want to talk about the Master of Ceremonies. Before rap was really known as a genre, the MC really spoke over microphones, or a microphone, not multiple microphones, while the records were being played. And this practice actually originated with Jamaican DJs doing this thing called toasting. And they would call out their friends' names while music was being played. And it was often combined with this thing called boasting, touting to the superiority of their own sound system and their own DJ skills. So the combination of the two sort of created the basis of some of our lyric content early on. Toasting, by the way, can also refer to prison culture stories of violence and crime. So we have some interesting roots when it comes to, again, the delivery of text alongside music. I'd love to pull up an example of what it sounds like in the Jamaican tradition before we hear it on the East Coast.
You are the local police chief, is that right, of the area?
For Concert Square.
And what sort of trouble do you encounter largely when when trouble comes?
It can be rough. It can be rough.
So this is obviously from a newscast spotlight on what's happening in dance clubs at the time in Jamaica. But this is an example of our toasting and boasting.
Come make we hear it from the Uptown Posse. Oh yeah, oh 3, 4, yeah, oh 3, 4. Let's look down the river and them sing the British song. Yes, must get me the hunted of the beating and the drum. They get the bugles high and they let the jumping nigga. Them sit behind the band flames and didn't say a thing. Them fired them guns and the British kept them. Them wasn't as many as there was a war. Them played once more and they began to win. Send to the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. Oh yeah, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
So, of course, I'm playing the sections that are really highlighting the boasting and the toasting, but there were whole other sections that were just more about the music. So this is going to have a lot of similarity, or at least hopefully will sound something sounds a little calypso and soca driven. But at the same time, we have that kind of delivery that's going to be very emblematic of the old school style, which will drop into at the beginning of part 2. So when we come back, we'll talk about the MC's characteristics, how they as an artist carve out their voice through the stylization of what we call a flow. And we'll also, of course, listen to some music, which we haven't gotten to in part 1. So I will see you back for part 2 shortly.